So my project is on disaster management in Egypt, and the main point of disaster management in Egypt is that most of it occurs post-disaster rather than as policies to prepare for it. And the main rationale behind this is that a lot of the natural disasters in Egypt actually hit in places where people don't live because the population of Egypt only covers about 5% of the country's surface area. And then another reason why this might be the case is because until recently, Egypt didn't have a very stable government, which I'll go into more later. As for the implementation pattern, it's mostly top down, and the reason for that is because since Egypt typically waits for a disaster to occur before they respond to it, that a lot of times they're going to have to go to the national government for help. As for the types of hazards that Egypt is susceptible to, there's a lot of natural hazards like earthquakes, droughts, flooding, infestation of insects, and landslides. They work to prevent flash flooding by the Department of Irrigation builds a lot of dams and man-made lakes, and they also install artificial water passages. And unfortunately, recently, Egypt did have a lot of bad flooding, so the process hasn't been perfected, but they are working towards making it better. And they also do a good job of predicting droughts through the Egyptian Water Research Center. They also have a lot of civil strife, such as revolutions and terrorism. So in 2011, they had a really big revolution to overthrow the president because he was really corrupt and disaster management was basically non existent in Egypt, at least in the preparedness sense. So after he was overthrown, they got a stable president around 2014, and he has worked with the Embassy of Egypt here in America to help prepare for terrorism a lot more than the previous presidents have, and they've done a good job of devising plans to prevent it as much as they can. For participants of disaster management, it's a lot of international groups such as the United Nations and their Relimer program to help plan for earthquakes. Also, the Embassy of Egypt here in America, and then within Egypt, there's a lot of different departments, such as the Department of Irrigation and the Egyptian Water Research Center. Obstacles to efficient management are, like I said, the history of corrupt government there. That was basically the biggest obstacle. And another obstacle they have is that they're not perfectly up to date, especially in architecture. So a lot of their buildings' infrastructure aren't able to withstand the shaking grounds of an earthquake. The lack of planning was the biggest obstacle they had. So the current president is working to kind of right the wrongs of his previous predecessors, and also the irrigation and water departments really monitor the different patterns they've seen, and they work to prevent them in the future. And as for the infestation of insects, Egyptian authorities monitor big swarms of insects so they can kind of warn farmers to pesticide their plants more in order to take care of those. Now that Egypt finally has good government, they're able to work towards more preparedness in their disaster management policy and will hopefully have much better disaster management in the future.